Hi, welcome everybody. You are joining the session on DEI and the environmental movement, revisiting the impact of ECO's diversity initiative. And I'm Chitra Kumar, I'm the moderator for this session. Maybe we'll just give everyone an extra 30 seconds to trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right. Well, time is of the essence because we have an amazing panel here that I have the privilege of being able to join because I am actually a former ECO associate myself. I joined way back when. I'm not even going to mention what year that was, but I was an ECO associate with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency New England office as a environmental justice GIS mapping associate. And that one summer internship turned into a career for me. It went from a summer to becoming employed with EPA as an intern with them to finish my master's thesis, helped me pay for my college tuition as well to be able to do that. And then slowly ended up becoming a 20-year career where I was applying some of those principles of equity and justice on public policy decisions. So I have myself a case in how these diversity and equity programs in early career and pipeline training programs actually influence a person's trajectory. And now I'm with the Union of Concerned Scientists, a nonprofit organization that I joined last year as the managing director for climate and energy. And I've had the pleasure of being part of this organization that's made its own journey and shifts into incorporating diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And just want to highlight a couple of those things as we go into this panel. One is that we partner with Green 2.0, which is an organization that's been set up to support the environmental NGO space in its journey. Secondly, we have a JEDI office, a Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion office that's been doing some really great work headed by Sonia Spears. And we've been ensuring, one example of something that we've been doing is incorporating equity and justice into our strategic plan, specifically incorporating justice and bringing science and justice together. And last year, something relevant to this particular panel's topic, our Center for Science and Democracy, which is led by Jennifer Jones, and put out a paper, which was authored by Anita Desikan, that talked specifically about strengthening and diversifying the federal STEM workforce. And one of the things I want to highlight from that analysis is that a number of federal agencies are doing some really good things, promising first steps, making partnerships with universities, but there's still space to grow, particularly with minority serving institutions. So, we've done some work in this space, but my role here is actually to welcome the following 4 extremely accomplished colleagues, professionals in this space. So I'm just going to quickly go through a little bit about each of them. And then we're going to use this as a very conversational panel where I'll ask some questions and I will keep time, make sure that we stay on track to get through a lot of really great content over the next 70 minutes. So let me first introduce Christy King, the Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion from Astound Broadband. She's the former manager of the Eco Diversity Initiative, which is, I think, going to be a really interesting place that we will learn a lot of lessons from. Next, I want to highlight Carlton Ely and welcome him. He's the Senior Director for Federal Strategies with Race Forward. also an ECO alum and a former colleague of mine from EPA. So welcome and thank you, Carlton, for inviting me to moderate this panel. I, of course, attended the March event that had the same name that you also hosted, which was a fantastic one. Next, Nataki Osborne-Jelks. Dr. Osborne-Jelks is an assistant professor at Spelman College and an ECO alumna. And she'll get into a lot of important lessons she's learned from doing some work about this project. And finally, our very own Jacoby Wilson. Dr. Wilson is a professor at the University of Maryland College Park, an ECO alum, and also is a host to this very conference. So I want to welcome him first. I'm going to ask him the very first question to get our discussion started. Now, Jacoby, I want to figure out from you, why did you decide to feature this particular plenary on the Environmental Careers Organization's diversity initiative? And by the way, Jacoby, I am keeping time, as I said, so 3 minutes here.
Okay, now everybody knows I'm along with it. No, it's exciting to be here today. This to me, this session is a culmination of just years of work of many folks out there that we're going to talk about who really invested in diversity and in the environmental movement and diversity as it relates to EPA and the federal government in general. And I really wanted to highlight this session, the program, because I wouldn't be here without the program. I was an ECO alum, right? I participated in the program. I did my internship in Atlanta at the US EPA. I went to various ECO conferences. I was able to meet Dr. Robert Bullard and Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis at the ECO conference at Elizabeth City State. I think it's 1995, 96. I don't want to keep mixing years up. And I knew I wanted to do environmental justice. And it just shows the importance of the investment, right, in diversity when it comes to environmental space, regardless of the sector we're in, right? Why we need to be everywhere. Right. And in many ways, this symposium, right, is a continuation of the ECO conference. We have a climate justice fellows program, which is informed by the ECO program. Many things that I do as a scholar, as a professor, as a director, right, with this symposium, with the Center for Engagement in Environmental Health, with the EJ Lab, I learned as an associate in the ECO program. So I wouldn't be here. So this in many ways is, the theme of this symposium is past, present, future, the EJ movement, honor the past to protect the future. Sankofa, right? I talked about earlier, bringing it back. We need to bring back the ECO program, okay? Bring it back. We need to lift up the ECO program. Bring it back. We need to return back to this infrastructure, right? And these investments, because many of the folks are doing the work in this field right now across various sectors. They were ECO alums, the current administrator, everybody on this call, right? ECO associate with the program. So this session really is an embodiment of what we mean by, restoring the past, honoring the past to protect the future. We need to invest in those folks who come from the communities impacted by environmental, energy, and climate injustices, so it can be part of the fabric of change. So that's what happened with me. That happened with Carlton. That happened with Nataki, right? That happened with you. And so we need programs like this more than ever. And I think the center, the EJ Lab, this symposium is a reflection. In many ways, it's a love letter, I'll say it that way, to the ECO program, and shows a need for why diversity is important. And diversity is empowerment. Diversity is really about freedom if we focus on diversity. And diversity of having leaders who come from these backgrounds, right? How it can have real impact and real change. So I'll pass the mic.
Thank you so much for setting the stage with such power and passion. Really, I'm remembering seeing you on the National Environmental Justice Advisory Committee and how movingly you speak on these issues. But let me pass it to Christy King. So we're here because you were successful in growing this trailblazing program. So can you characterize, what was the diversity initiative?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. I don't know if I should be going after Shakobi because that was some serious passion, which I love. I love. I often kind of describe Eco's Diversity Initiative as kind of a movement that was, right on time, right? It was innovative at the time, groundbreaking, authentic, and really born out of need. Jeff Cook, who is the founder and president of the Environmental Careers Organization, was a man on a mission, and his vision was not only to positively impact the environment by providing these experiential, learning opportunities for young people, but also to open doors of opportunity and really to address this glaring gap. So the impetus for the creation of ECO's Diversity Initiative, it launched in 1990. It was largely centered around the lack of diversity throughout the environmental field, the lack of exposure to environmental career opportunities for marginalized communities, and the lack of support services. So the program placed thousands of students and recent graduates from historically underrepresented backgrounds into career opportunities from hundreds of colleges, including HBCUs, Hispanic serving, tribally controlled colleges across the country. In addition to kind of building this robust pipeline of diverse talent by providing what I'll call kind of this conduit for early exposure and an introduction to environmental career opportunities that, quite honestly, at the time, most were not at all aware of. They didn't know that these opportunities even existed. And so in addition to that, it simultaneously increased their knowledge of environmental issues, techniques and policies and processes, all of which really equipped them with skills and knowledge and opportunity to make a positive impact on the environment and the industry, but also to become leaders in this field, which is what we're seeing now, right? And so, beyond this, the Diversity Initiative was about true partnerships with nonprofit organizations, companies, state and local government, and especially the federal government agency, which obviously a significant call out to the partnership with EPA, which lasted for many, many years and included 20 million plus $1 million investment over those years. But finally, like the work of the Diversity Initiative was also about support, right? It provided education and resources that included national conferences and campuses, campus seminars, roundtables, books, and just a lot around education and awareness. So it was these paid opportunities, this exposure, this education, and then all that was kind of wrapped around that, which is why I think it was as successful as it was.
Yeah, incredible. It sets up this next question so well with Carlton. You were in EPA's Office of Environmental Justice as an employee, and you're also an ECO alum. So can you speak to how the Diversity Initiative was a pipeline program and important for supporting the early goals of the environmental justice movement from your perspective?
No, thank you very much for that question. Let me start by acknowledging that I was an ECO associate in 1994. So now I'm celebrating 30 years. My first, at the time when I was an ECO associate, I spent 3 months working for EPA's Regional Environmental Justice Program in Seattle, Washington. And 2 years after that assignment, I actually started working for the Environmental Protection Agency, initially in Kansas City and then in Washington, D.C. And my time actually in the Office of Environmental Justice was during the last 5 years of my career at EPA. I worked at EPA for 20 years. But in response to your question in terms of the history, in terms of how EPA got involved in this and why it was important, I think it's important to acknowledge that encouraging diversity and leveraging untapped talent was one of the early victories of the environmental justice movement, and it's a victory that we don't talk about enough. In the early years of the environmental justice movement, there was no ambiguity concerning the topic of race, lived experience, or the need to build trust within impacted communities. All of it mattered. And also the environmental justice movement saw itself as a direct continuation of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. In my opinion, the diversity initiative helped to address a couple of goals as environmental justice became a national movement. First, the mainstream environmental justice movement lacked racial diversity, as was suggested earlier by Christy. And this is well documented, of course, in a number of different books written by scholars. But because of the lack of representation, the mainstream environmental movement didn't recognize the legitimacy of the conditions of environmental justice soon enough. And in response, people living in impacted communities led their own conversations about environmental protection and racism. So ECO's diversity initiative recognized that students who are closest to the problem can actually be closest to the solution. Second, successful organizing includes inside-outside strategies. And in this case, environmental justice leaders on the outside understood the importance of having allies and advocates working inside public institutions. And so many of the ECO associates that had short-term assignments focusing on environmental justice had an opportunity to fashion an environmental justice lens that informed how they viewed their work, whether they pursued careers in civil service or in another sector after the fact. And third, I think it's important to acknowledge that as we talk about the history of environmental justice, especially at the federal level and some of the earliest goals, we have to talk about Dr. Clarice Gaylord. And Dr. Clarice Gaylord was the first director of EPA's Office of Environmental Justice. Some forget that the initial home for that office was actually in human resources at EPA following the creation of the new program. But clearly that this may have been an interesting starting point for a program to actually, in its origins be. But Dr. Gaylord had a clear understanding of how a lack of diversity in the workforce still had a direct impact on public policy. And so one of the actions that she took was to work closely with the Environmental Careers Organization. And through that partnership, college students were able to secure assignments with the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C., and its regional offices through the diversity initiative specifically.
Well, it's really very interesting to remember some of those historic groundings. I want to turn it to Nataki now. Nataki, it seems that ECO's diversity initiative has a living legacy. So it includes everybody on this panel, as we talked about, and I had the pleasure of working with you when you were on the NEJAC while I was at EPA. So it's great to be here again. But now, based on your research, would you say that the diversity initiative contributed to a generational shift in environmental leadership that would have been difficult to achieve in the absence of the program? Is that something you're finding?
Thank you for that question. That is absolutely something that I'm finding. And I feel like Shakobi already took all of my talking points in terms of this living legacy, because even as you mentioned in your question, Chitra, we are that living legacy. And I think an observation that I identified while conducting the research on a forthcoming retrospective report about the diversity initiative is that as the diversity initiative was getting started in 1990, this was also a time in which communities of color, environmental justice groups were really starting to form. You had the first People of Color National Leadership Summit in 1991, where the 17 principles of environmental justice were developed. At that summit, you had this time at which there started to be a shift in terms of attention being paid to environmental justice issues. And so it just happened to coalesce with this time in which the diversity initiative was being born out of ECO. And so ECO had this, already had a venue, already had a platform, already had a vehicle through which they could bring in young people to give them paid experiences in the environmental field. But now, as they started to be very intentional about tapping into audiences, who had not been involved in that work in a substantial way before, they were able to really not only provide, just paid opportunities in the environmental field, but as Christy already mentioned, those opportunities were both in the federal government, they were in state and local government, and they were also in nonprofit and community-based organizations. So these eco associates got a chance to cut their teeth on lots of environmental justice related work. As I talked to some of the former associates, some of them were involved in things like helping to draft the first executive order on environmental justice. They were helping to write environmental justice plans that came out of the headquarters of EPA or out of regional offices. In terms of my own experience as an eco associate, I worked in the Superfund Hazardous Waste Division in EPA Region 4 and got a chance to be on the ground with communities to understand the challenges that they were facing. And so those types of experiences gave all of us really not only something that was memorable, but something that was really life-changing. And so in terms of this generational shift, now we have so many leaders who are out here working across various sectors, doing work that is connected to racial justice, doing work that is connected to environmental justice. And the common denominator for all of us is that we were first exposed to this work through being eco associates. So that generational shift is real. And without this program, I think we would be talking about something completely different.
Really exciting. I want to come back to Dr. Wilson, Jacoby. So you mentioned before, and everyone here has mentioned how important the eco associate experience was. And some would even say it was a career defining moment. And, I'm curious if you could expand upon what you were saying before about how that experience affected your career. I mean, give us lots of good examples, but please add on anything else that comes to mind.
Yeah. I mean, early on, I kind of reflect on some of my best mentors. Where I went to historically Black college course at Alabama A&M University, Bulldogs, same place that Dr. Bullard went to. And it's just interesting that I was in a NIH funded program, Mark MBRS program, a biology. It was an ecotoxicology scholars program. So I was getting like the science research experience through that program, but more environmental justice and policy experience came through the eco program. So with eco, was associated with the there was EPA had a number of programs back then. They had the Minority Associate Institutions Fellowship program. That then became, I think, the GROW program. So I used it as a foundation to get other fellowships. I was a Udall scholar. I was a Thurgood Marshall scholar. I was a NASA space scholar, right? I was able, to do a series of internships. That was one of my earliest internships. I interned at the Tennessee Valley Authority, right? And so that really got, and actually the eco working in Atlanta, that was Summer Olympics that year. That was one of my first EJ projects, was working on looking at air quality issues in North Birmingham. So, and North Birmingham is still having, air quality issues, right? And so really got a chance to do that work and got a chance to leverage it. And so that was really foundational work for me, to do really good work as an undergrad student. And then went to grad school, and this for the students out there, your undergrads, don't apply to only one grad school, only apply to one. But luckily, the eco program was on my resume. I was a little bit too confident. Now, as an older person, like, no, I would never do that. But I knew I was going to get in because I had all these experiences, but they really were built around the environment, built around getting good mentoring from folks in the eco program, right? From people, the internships that I did, from my undergraduate mentors. So together, it created a tapestry for me to, create, different paths I could go down. And so I was able to leverage a lot of that and get into UNC Chapel Hill, and then get additional training by Omega Wilson. I listening to Omega's panel today, and the EJ movement, in North Carolina. Also get trained by Dr. Steve Wing, right? But the foundation for a lot of that training, get me on my trajectory to be now a professor. And I'm gonna say something that's not to say, I'm not sure it's a true statement. I like to say, kind of and jokingly, but it's serious. How many full professors, African American, that who are full professors in environmental health? How many of y'all know? What I'm saying is, I'm saying that in a joking way, but I wouldn't be here as one of the few without the eco program, But also going back to Sankofa, bring it back. I shouldn't be one of the few. Full professor, Black man in environmental health, in academia. That's why we need an eco program. So I said that earlier, but again, I'm not even past the mic. I know I'm getting close to my time. But it's really without that program, without the experiences, I would not be where I am today. I would not be the scholar, I wouldn't be the advocate, and I wouldn't have the vision that I have, because that vision, again, as I said earlier, was informed by my experiences in the ECO program. I'm trying to replicate the best of what I got out of the ECO program. And I've been doing that for the last 10 years. And that's when we think about the 10th anniversary of this symposium and why we have this session. Again, what we're doing and what I've done in many ways is to take the baton, take the torch, and try to keep moving forward, bend the arc to, toward for justice, and doing that by bringing in more students who come from these diverse backgrounds to be in these spaces, have an impact on environmental justice issues.
Well, we're right here with you. Carlton, some people talk about eco and they remember the internships. Jacoby has referenced, you've referenced the eco community quite a bit. So I'm wondering, could you, for the benefit of the audience, talk about eco beyond the placement program? What else was it?
Sure. No, I'm happy to do that. And I'm gonna go down memory lane a bit. And if people hear something that they remember, they can use an emoji in order to raise their hand. But the Environmental Careers Organization, as Jacoby already indicated, created a great placement program, but this only scratched the surface. When you became an eco-associate, you joined a community of practice. And that's not what they referred to it as at that time, but in retrospect, it really was a community of practice. First, ECO had a clear mission. They helped participants to develop environmental careers. And for many, the process of discovery that started with an internship, it continued by attending the National Environmental Careers Conference, which was hosted by ECO and they had on an annual basis. So ECO understood associates didn't have access to the same information streams. And so their national conference was one method for actually narrowing the knowledge gap between the associates themselves. I mean, the information stream for someone who attended Yale School of Forestry may not actually be the same as someone who attended Elizabeth City State University. And so the conference was always content rich. The speakers were always prepared to fill your cup. And within 2 days, attendees could learn about environmental opportunities that span the public, the private, and the nonprofit sectors all in one space. Also, ECO narrowed the knowledge gap by hosting a career fair at their national conference that featured university recruiters. And sometimes it's important to note that emerging professionals need to retool or they need to pursue options that may make them more marketable. And so ECO's national conference helped participants to explore pathways for reaching their career goals. And so participants could chat with a job recruiter or they could chat with a university recruiter. And if college funding was a gap, then the federal job recruiters that were at the conference had information on fellowship opportunities that they often shared with the people who attended. Another reason why ECO felt like a community of practice is because it embraced environmental justice fairly quickly. And in this case, ECO understood the importance of getting on board rather than getting left behind. And because of a shared interest in diversifying the environmental movement, environmental justice leaders regularly participated in ECO's national conference. And so this made it easy for attendees to find peers who shared similar interests as well. It made it easy for students who were now meeting in person to people that they had been reading about, whether it was Bernice Miller-Travis, or whether it was Bob Bullard or Peggy Shepard, people that they spent time reading about as summer interns. They actually had the opportunity to meet these people in person at the ECO conference. So ECO's approach to investing in its associates really was unparalleled. They were effective in reminding associates as well as reminding alumni that their stories mattered and that the lessons were always evergreen. And so over the span of my career, I've had the opportunity to participate in some professional fellowships. I've worked with different professional associations. But the more meaningful experiences really were designed to cultivate a long-term relationship. And in the end, my interactions with ECO were a very meaningful relationship and a very meaningful experience.
Thanks for sharing that. The other day I was going throughout my file cabinets and getting rid of old files, and I found my Eco Associate packet with all of the cards that I had saved from various, as when I was a job seeker. That was really exciting. So I want to go back to Nataki. You are the co-author of a retrospective report on the diversity initiative. Why are you working on this report? Can you share a little bit more? And why is the story coming out now?
Thanks again for that question. I'm working on this report because it's the diversity initiative, as has been said in this conversation already, was a great idea. And really, in my opinion, a great idea that sort of died an early death. And as Jacoby has mentioned, the time really is ripe to sort of bring something like the diversity initiative back. We haven't seen any other initiative that was successful in getting over 4,500 people of color, young, students of color, introduced to the environmental field. As that happened, again, we've talked about sort of this living legacy in terms of all the folks who are now engaged in equity work, and that common denominator being exposed to these issues through participation in the diversity initiative. And when we look out today, as in terms of what's needed to address all of the pandemics of racism, climate change and injustice, all the many things that have been discussed here today, we know that now more than ever, we need something that is going to be very intentional about equipping, shaping, recruiting these new leaders that we're going to need to help address these issues, not just in the future, but today. And so because it was an initiative that really, I think, sort of ended before its time, the time now is really right for us to bring this back up, to show how successful this initiative was, to really demonstrate that it had support by government agencies, support in terms of philanthropy, and not only that, the need continues to be there. So, I say, why not now? But now it's just as good a time as any, given the fact that we need a program like this more than ever. I've been talking a little bit long, but let me just say this other thing. As we think about the current attacks on diversity, this to me raises another issue with respect to why a program like this is so needed. Today, it is sorely needed because of those attacks on diversity. And then if we think about it, those who are a part of this eco generation, as I think Carlton has sort of dubbed it, will soon be retiring. And so who's going to come behind us and take our places? And we need a program like this that will prime the pump, that will engage and expose and help equip the next generation of racial diversity and equity leaders.
Yeah, what a good reminder. And Christy, coming back to you, you must be so proud hearing so many accolades and also the case for why we need continued support for these initiatives. What, if you could, what lessons from managing and building it up have you taken with you over the span of your 30-year career?
Thanks for that question. It was so funny just a moment ago, Trisha, when you were talking about finding your old eco documents. I was cleaning out my basement and found this box that had all of these old documents. It's been down there for obviously 20 years, a long time. This report from this National Roundtable on Diversity and the Environment that took place back in 2000, beyond the Green Book that ECO published, the ECO Associate Handbook. It was so nice to kind of go through memory lane, and I was like, and how appropriate. And now here I am, talking about this. So that was awesome. The interesting thing is the irony is that I was, only a few years older than many of the college students that I was supporting when I first started at ECO. And at that time I was, my early 20s, and I don't think I fully recognized kind of the significance of the work at that time until later. But when that realization occurred because of this work, I really recognized the importance of the power of supporting and uplifting those who are marginalized, giving voice to those who may not be in a position to be heard, and providing support. And I think all of these lessons have certainly planted a seed in me and followed me, because what I know is true and proven is that, targeted and very intentional efforts to increase and foster diversity make a huge difference, and they are incredibly powerful. The impact of this work on individuals, on throughout communities, and certainly the effect that it has on organizations and institutions is profound. There's tons of research out there from McKinsey and Deloitte and others that talks about the benefits of diversity, right? And the companies that with high ethnic and cultural diversity outperform those with less, by like 36% for profitability. Even those that have higher gender diversity on their executive teams, 25% more profitability, and the research and the list goes on and on. And it also showed me the potential that exists when doors are open, when new opportunities are presented, when education and awareness are properly aligned, and what lasting impact those acts can have when they're sustained, when they stay top of mind, and when they're advanced. So I felt like I was privileged to have had the opportunity to lead and be part of ECO's diversity initiative program. It impacted me personally, very profoundly. I talk about where my roots are, and those always start with my ECO story, right? And being at a nonprofit, and for that many years, and everything that I was exposed to, and being able to travel to go to Detroit and Cleveland and Chicago and talk to these environmental justice leaders and talk to them about, we have this opportunity for you to have a young person to help you, to knock on doors, to do these surveys, to find out what's happening to your community. That was a privilege for me, and especially at such a young age, it shaped and molded me and into the professional that I am now, and it also impacted me personally. And then when I hear, from Carlton and Jacoby and Nataki and so many others who talk about the impact, and even you talked about the impact and the power of ECO and those opportunities and what the diversity initiative, the program did, it blows me away sometimes, right? When you just kind of sit back, and it just makes me proud and honored to have been part of something so big and so much bigger than me, and all of us, and the long-term impact that it's made.
For sure. Oh, thanks for sharing that. Nataki, can I come back to you and see, are there any aha moments that you had while we're working on the report? Maybe anything that Christy's comments evoked for you?
Well, one of the aha moments that I had, and this isn't really about the student related outcomes, but as a part of writing the report, I also interviewed individuals who worked for ECO, just like Christy, and others, as well as some of the federal partners who were involved in the initiative as well. And what I heard from them is that this was an initiative that was not only fortifying for the students, but it really helped young professionals to develop as well. It was almost as if when folks came to the various conferences and diversity roundtables, et cetera, that even those who were already working in the world of work got some strength, were able to make some great connections, and were able to kind of move their careers forward as well. And for many of them, that meant deepening their work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It meant for many of them doing what they could to open as many doors as they could for young people, for students and others, kind of coming behind them. And it was almost as if ECO sort of inspired them to step up and to be leaders in that work. And so that was not necessarily something that I was expecting to find, but I heard that being repeated time after time from those partners, both within the federal government and those former employees of ECO. Just like Christy, who that was one of her first roles, and now she is a seasoned professional in diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it kind of started with that initial experience and started with the opportunities that she had just to manage this program. So that was kind of an aha moment that it had some far-reaching benefits that were quite holistic and that went beyond just the students who they were exposing to the environmental career opportunities.
Yeah, wow, so powerful. We discussed the connections between ECO's diversity initiative and environmental justice. I think several of you have talked about that. President Biden named racial equity as a domestic policy priority. So I want to come back to Carlton. Are there any connections between ECO's diversity initiative and racial equity?
That's a good question, and yes, there are. The current focus on racial equity is new for some. Obviously, the 2 executive orders that President Biden signed have elevated the profile and level of attention on the issue, but it's probably more accurate to suggest that there's a renewed focus. At Race Forward, I approach this work with a sense of historic perspective because I think when you focus on history, it creates opportunities to build on the foundation of past success rather than start from scratch. For example, I mentioned Dr. Clarice Gaylord earlier, and she was the first director of EPA's Office of Environmental Justice. But it's also accurate to suggest that Dr. Gaylord was the first equity officer at the federal level, since environmental equity was the first name of the office that she actually led. So in part, Race Forward felt it was important to revisit ECO's diversity initiative in order to bridge the connections between past efforts and current policy priorities. ECO's diversity initiative received federal support, and in addition to being a successful program, the investment by the funders is still paying off. And the evidence is easy to track when you follow the careers of ECO alumni. The diversity initiative represented an important starting point for many young professionals, and many of them are actively contributing to work that strives to advance racial equity right now. So Dr. Nataki Osborne-Jelks works on racial equity and access to green space in Atlanta. Dr. Sakobi Wilson works on racial equity and efforts to improve public health at the University of Maryland. In my former role as a federal employee, I worked on racial equity and urban planning. But our stories are not unique. And so for this reason, the contributions of ECO's diversity initiative need to be revisited rather than allow them to remain in obscurity. The solutions that were presented by the initiative need to be studied. The trailblazing actions of initiatives need to be acknowledged within the context of our current narratives. So sometimes the narratives that we're sharing only focus on very prominent issues, but there's still other issues that are beneath the surface that sometimes we need to elevate as well. And although many DEI efforts are subject to pushback or to a lot of scrutiny currently, the public needs research that's evidence-based in order to correct misinformation or to counter some of the false claims that really have no merit. In my opinion, attempting to stifle good programs that invest in diverse talent don't just cut off the people who are affected. It really hurts us all in the end.
Well said. Jacoby, I want to put you on the spot here. You travel frequently. You see firsthand the impacts of climate change and environmental injustice. From your vantage point as a researcher, as a scientist, are federal investments in environmental pipeline programs still needed? You want to add to what you said before?
Yeah, I'll add to it. I'll come from a different angle. Going back to some of the previous comments about the executive orders on racial equity, but also the executive order 14008. So we think about again the Biden administration, and throughout the symposium, we'll be talking about the Biden administration and impacts. Because that's been an important part of the the present work that's happening in the EJ movement. So you got to talk about Executive Order 14008 and the Justice 40 Executive Order. So we've been talking a lot, and we usually talk a lot about Justice 40 from perspective of funding, even though I know the language said 40% of the benefits. But those of you who know what I'm about to say, those remember stoichiometry from chemistry class. You got the inputs, the left side of the equation, and the right side. You can't have the right side, you don't have the left side. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna leave that alone. So you gotta have the inputs and outputs, y'all. So money. But the point about I'm trying to make with Justice 40, when it comes to investments in leadership, investments in the people, right? Investments in students. One of the comments I've made consistently, we need to see Justice 40 as it relates to historically Black colleges and other MSIs. How we make sure that 4% of the federal investments that are out there, they're actually going to these HBCUs, to Hispanic serving institutions, to Native American serving colleges, right? AAPI colleges, because these again are the youth, the young folks coming from communities that have these issues. So I think you got to have part of Justice 40 has to be the pipeline programs. Now we do know there was a recent announcement from NIH, was really surprising and pretty cool, that they're going to have NIH has a new EJ Scholars Program. Like, ooh, but that's for folks who are farther on the pathway. We got to get the folks who are, like what ECO was doing, undergrad, and also K-12 component of ECO as well. But I think, these pipeline programs are very important. I mean, as I said earlier, we have a summer internship program, an EJ Scholars Program, which is kind of trying to replicate the ECO program, also replicate some work I was exposed to at UNC Chapel Hill. A shout out to Dr. Frierson with the SPJRE program, the SPJRE program. You also have our Climate Justice Fellows Program. So the Climate Justice Fellows Program is another program where we train people who are 18 plus, so 18 and older, to learn about climate justice issues. And then they work in communities that have climate justice issues, and they do a capstone project. So you heard what Christy said, you heard what Nataki said, you heard what Carter said earlier. They do a capstone project, and they work with a community that's dealing with these issues. So, but we don't have as many resources to scale that up, right? To the Mid-Atlantic region, which is our primary focus, or to scale it up across the country. So yes, you need to bring these programs back. Another program I forgot to mention about my own biography about, I talked about, undergrad. I was a 2-time STAR Fellow, right? And in the EPA, I wouldn't have been a STAR Fellow without the foundation of from the ECO program, the other EPA opportunities I received, and other opportunities like scholarship, third grade master, et cetera. We need those programs. This is the time to actually bring those programs back, because they are in alignment, they are in concordance with the racial equity executive orders. They're in concordance, alignment with Justice 40. You cannot have Justice 40 work. You cannot get the distribution of justice if you do not have a workforce, right, that's not reflective of the folks who are most impacted. You got to uplift lived experiences, right? That's something we learned from the ECO program. Bring it back again. Send call for y'all. Bring that from the past to the present to impact the future. So I think, with the work we're doing right now, we have this Mid-Atlantic Climate Action Hub. As some of y'all may know, I'm co-director of the Region 3 Thriving Community Technical Assistance Center, where Dr. Adrian Hollis, National Wildlife Federation, is the parent organization on that. Communities that we're working with as hub partners, we're trying to provide them with technical assistance, right? ECO program and programs like that, you can have people getting trained while they're also serving. Trained, again, was said, while they're serving communities. And so, yes, we need those pipeline programs because that's the generation next, but also generation now, right? So I'll pass the mic.
Nicely said. Generation next and generation now. Nice. I want to pick up on you all are quoting executive order numbers. So 14008 is tackling climate change at home and abroad. Carlton, you mentioned the equity executive orders 13985 and 14091. You didn't mention the numbers, but for the wonks out there and posterity, just wanted to throw those out. And then we made a distinction there. And now I want to come back to Christy and ask you to add in your own words, why did the diversity initiative work?
So I really think it was all about education, exposure, and opportunity. I mean, we, understood the gaps that existed throughout the industry for people of color. We knew, the impact addressing these gaps would make, and we're really willing to do what was needed to make that happen. We understood also the value that diversity created, which I talked a little bit about, and how much it would really enrich and strengthen the organizations that we partnered with. And for them for that tenant, we definitely led with that. We really built and maintained and kind of grew these strong and reciprocal partnerships and relationships with allies and believers in the potential and impact of change, right? And understood the value and investment that organizations like the EPA were making. We also, on the other side, so it was kind of the organizations, these partnerships, but we also cared about the development of these young people and the students, right? I remember sitting on the couch this was one of our potential prospective interns, her 80-year-old grandmother, on this she had plastic covering over her couch, and I was sitting there trying to convince her that her grandbaby, who had, never been outside the city limits of Detroit, Michigan, that she would be safe and that she would be okay. And this would be an amazing opportunity for her if she came to Cleveland, relocated to Cleveland for the summer to work on these environmental justice issues for an internship. And first of all, she's like, what is that? So it was just an investment of time and love and patience. I had to talk with her 2 more times, but eventually she let her baby come to do this internship, which was phenomenal. But it was really kind of looking at the program and approaching it with this kind of holistic lens, and moving also with intention and thoughtfulness, with all of our stakeholders in mind. So I feel like those were some of the ingredients to making this successful. And then for all the reasons, those reasons, and because of, the multiple things that we've heard from Carlton and others here, who so kind of eloquently articulated the reason behind this, right? And the why and everything that others have shared. So I think recognizing the need, creating this solution, executing on that, and then keeping it relevant and continuing to focus on diversity and the equity part and inclusion. And it just, really made a huge difference.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I know that we have gone through so many good points here, and we're running out of time, sadly. And I didn't even have to use my cane or anything, and y'all did so great. And yet, I want to ask just one more question for the panel. And this is picking up on something Nataki said earlier, which is why this is so important now and what's at risk. So Vice President Harris announced she was going to run for president, and then we heard some political critics suggesting she was a DEI hire, for example. So we know the label didn't stick. It also backfired. So how is DEI being used in political rhetoric? And then I'm just going to pair it with this question and concern about Project 2025 and see where you all are. Who wants to pick up on one of these? And I'm going to keep us short because I did want to leave some time for questions from the audience as well. maybe a minute each. I know, meaty questions.
I'll start. Chitra, thank you for raising that question. And I've heard this rhetoric before. I think everyone here has heard this rhetoric before. Let's be clear, DEI hire is not a slur. It shouldn't be treated as a slur. I was a diversity hire in the 1990s. I'm unapologetic about the fact that I was a diversity hire. I was proud to be a diversity hire because I know the victory that led to me being a diversity hire was through the nonviolent sacrifices of civil rights leaders. I appreciate everything that ECO did as an organization to be deliberate and intentional in terms of its focus on creating pipeline programs that really would make the environmental movement more representative. We've talked about Jeff Cook. I also want to make sure that we elevate the name of Percy Pollard. When I became a ECO associate, he was the chairman of the board of the Environmental Careers Organization. And the reason why I mentioned the civil rights movement is because I became an ECO associate when I was 20 years old. I think Percy Pollard was probably in his 50s, maybe his mid 50s. And he was a Virginia State graduate, but he worked for IBM. And eventually he became the chairman of ECO's board. So Percy Pollard understood the importance of what the Environmental Careers Organization was doing in the process of creating these opportunities. Percy Pollard would have lived in an era where many of the persons who were students in the 1990s had the opportunity to access spaces that his generation wouldn't have had the opportunity to access. And so that's the reason why this work is important. And Percy Pollard was a great mentor to a lot of ECO associates and alumni. It was his gift. It was his passion. He loved doing it. And he really was committed to paying it forward. And I think that's the one thing that people don't talk about enough is that for those persons who are diversity hires, who enter into these spaces, they often enter with a understanding and an obligation that they have to pay it forward for someone else. And so I just want to amplify that as we, reflect on the type of rhetoric that people are using and to counter that with the understanding that I'm proud to be a diversity initiative hire. I was proud to be a diversity initiative recruit to graduate school. And I'm absolutely unapologetic about it. And there's no reason why we should be making something unlawful that shouldn't be unlawful to begin with. Your other question was about Project 2025. And Project 2025 is clearly a toxic proposal that clearly would affect every aspect of American life. And so we have to double down on protecting our democratic values as well as our values concerning racial equity. As we work with a renewed sense of purpose, we have to remind audiences that these issues are inseparable. You can't have democracy without racial equity, and you can't have racial equity without democracy. So Project 2025 is a serious threat. It reminds me why John Lewis was committed to coaching public institutions and reminding audiences near the end of his life about the importance of getting in good trouble. We have to actively preserve the institutions that we value because they will not sustain themselves without our help. And so the shadow of Project 2025 doesn't go away if Trump does not win in November. And as a result, we still need to keep an eye on the institutions that conceived the plan to begin with, because they have attempted to entrench an unhealthy system that's rooted in power, abuse, control, and exploitation.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. What I see, the attacks on DEI, as Carlton said, it's an attack on racial equity. But it's not the first time, y'all. you know, this is not the first time, you know, past is prologue. Again, I keep saying, remember the past? You know, thinking about this, the present, right? And so, you know, you look at the history of this country, right? To me, um, you know, how racism is baked into a lot of our policies and programs, and we're trying to have initiatives to dismantle racism, right? In many ways, our focus on racial equity is to dismantle racism, dismantle racist systems, dismantle discrimination. So you see some, and you see that in Project 2025 as it relates to, you know, trying to attack diversity, equity, inclusion in higher education, trying to attack it in the federal government, you know, one to take us backwards. You know, I say we're in Jim Crow 2.0. We're fighting against Jim Crow 2.0 right now, but it wants to create Jim Crow 3.0, right? And we're not going backwards. And as Carlton said, we have to, this playbook, regardless of if Trump wins or not, the playbook is out there. They're going to try to implement these efforts. And also from an environmental perspective, you know, just trying to handicap all the progress we made as it relates to addressing environmental issues in this country. And our, you know, we have an environmental regulatory schema, not just an EPA across the federal family, but then you're trying to undo that, right? Undo what we're doing around climate change, undo as it relates to all our policies and programs, you know, make sure big oil and gas is big oil and gas again. That means folks who are impacted by environmental, climate, energy, and justice will be in the bullseye even more. You know, dealing with toxic trauma, dealing with sacrifice zones even more. So we're not going back. So we have to be, you know, keep our eyes on the prize, but also keep our eyes on these efforts to take us backwards. So I'll pass the mic back.
Yeah, thank you so much. Quickly, Christy, and then I want to open it up for Q&A.
Could you tell I wanted to say something?
Yeah.
So I completely agree with everything that's been said. And, you know, Jacoby was kind of taking the words out of my mouth. This DEI hire, the attacks, it is not anything new. I mean, for years, you know, before, you know, all the stuff with affirmative action was kind of the term affirmative action hire was also used to kind of diminish, you know, the credentials and the qualifications, you know, of Black employees and other people of color. And now, you know, those who are uninformed and ignorant believe that, you know, any person who is not, you know, white or male or kind of fits that mold is a DEI hire. And it's, you know, solely, it's demeaning, and it's frankly just quite, you know, it's quite ignorant. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is meant to, you know, make workplaces more welcoming and safer for employees. It's, you know, designed to ensure that, you know, discrimination in the form of, you know, unconscious bias, conscious bias, that it does not keep the workplace, you know, homogeneous and inequitable. That's what it's about. And, you know, these statements are kind of meant to discredit and demean individuals for political purposes. And I think they are doing just far more harm than that. And they just are completely misrepresenting the purpose of diversity. We talk about, you know, this not being this, you know, zero-sum game. And when we promote DEI, we're not undermining the process. It's when we talk about this hiring piece of quality candidates or excluding people. Instead, we're really being intentional about expanding the candidate pool and including more diverse candidates because we want to make our organizations richer and better. And specifically with this word equity, which some have tried to kind of downplay and pull out of the equation when they talk about DEI. This is about focusing on uplifting and supporting and advancing those who have been marginalized and are starting in different places and positioning them for success. After the, you know, the SCOTUS decision, and organizations are kind of navigating this wide-ranging attacks on DEI, ranging from, you know, its cutbacks and you know, diversity recruiting efforts, all kinds of things, banning affirmative. It's all of these things are happening, and folks are getting caught up. And I think they are beginning to focus on things that they really shouldn't be. And we need to recenter ourselves and focus on the why behind this and recognize that there's still so much more work to do, and that instead of being so divisive, we need to come together and be focused on the right things.
I really appreciate all those comments. I'm knowing that we could have a whole hour dedicated to this topic, I'm gonna transition us to our group Q&A. I am a technology, not the most savvy in terms of the new Zoom technology. So I'm going to ask for a little help in inviting colleagues who are out there listening to share some questions with us. Do we have a Q&A feature, or are they able to ask some questions via the chat feature? Jacoby, do you know? Or Eli, do you know?
Yeah, team, can you put if there are questions out there from the stream, can y'all put the questions in the chat so we can see them? And while we wait, you can go ahead if you want to ask us another ask another question while we wait for the
Yeah.
audience questions come
Sure
in.
thing. Yeah, great idea. I mean, and I'll also just allow for any of you to say, who would you like to thank as an ECO alum? Is there anybody who comes to mind? Y'all been thanking a lot of folks as you've gone along, which is amazing. Anyone else? Or Nataki, do you want to get in on that last question?
Well, I was already going to go with the thanking, and I know that we've already mentioned Dr. Clarice Gaylord quite a bit, but I just have to lift her up again, and maybe just also point out that there were a number of government agencies that were involved in supporting the diversity initiative. They were partners. They provided locations for eco associates to carry out their work and to get that paid work experience. But the contribution of the Environmental Protection Agency, in part under the leadership of Dr. Gaylord, was really phenomenal. So many of our diversity initiative alumni went through EPA, and there was this strategy that EPA had, and a strategy that the Office of Environmental Justice had to really level that playing field to get as many students in as possible. And I think it's already been mentioned, they did K through 12 initiatives, as well as working with college students, graduate students, and early career professionals and career changers. And so thanking Dr. Gaylord is a must. There were lots of other people within EPA. I know some who I've interviewed, like Danny Gogol and others. And then even some of our former eco associates who then went to work in the Office of Environmental Justice, like Mustafa Santiago Ali, just has done amazing work to open the doors, not only for communities, but for young people coming behind him. So I think it's very appropriate that we uplift those names and thank those folks as well.
Thank you, Nataki. So we did get one question coming in. So do you work with poor white women with a disability? I'm very interested in environmental justice. How do you address that? Who wants to address that? And I guess this would be you, meaning do DEI efforts or programs, pipeline programs, future ones. How would we approach this question?
So I'm sorry, Shidra, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So the question is, when we're talking about DEI or pipeline programs, do we work with poor white women with a disability who are interested in environmental justice, like, specifically?
Well, I was going to answer the question from a corporate perspective, but with the EJ piece, maybe Jacoby or others might.
I would say, when it comes to our undergraduate EJ Scholars programs and our Climate Fellows program, we are open to anybody who's interested in the issues. We have racially diverse, gender diversity, and we also have ability diversity in previous cohorts of folks in the undergraduate scholars program and both the Climate Fellows program. So yes. And then also when it comes to the work of the TIC-TAC, for example, we are working in diverse communities. So we work in urban communities, right? We also work in very rural communities. So we work with folks who are dealing with industrial chicken farm issues in the Eastern Shore, which from a racial ethnic perspective, you have, folks who are both of different racial ethnic groups. And also we do work in Baltimore and Curtis Bay, for example. So we have racially diverse working class communities with white, Black, Hispanic. And then also in Appalachia, we have we're working with Appalachian Voices and others in that part of the region for the Tic Tac. So, you know, the EJ work is very inclusive. And if you think about it, the new Executive Order 14096, we also include disabilities. It's been added as a group that we want to focus on when it comes to environmental justice issues. So I'll pass the mic, but thanks for that great question.
Yeah, and I'll build on what Jacoby has said, because I think there has always been this misnomer or misunderstanding around environmental justice. Clearly, environmental justice leaders were very self-determined, given the fact that many communities that were impacted by pollution may have been people of color communities, communities that were on the other side of the tracks. But even from the earliest days of the environmental justice movement, it was quite clear, even to the leaders in the movement, that this was an issue that wasn't just about race, it was equally about income. And there were lower income communities in places like West Virginia and Kentucky and Appalachia that were equally bearing the burdens of pollution from corporations and from incompatible land uses and from problems of neglect. So I offer that to remind the audience that the topic of environmental justice has always used a very broad catchment. While it is about race, it is equally about income. And based on that particular catchment, there are a lot of persons who are able to fit in and have their issues addressed through environmental justice as an approach. So I want people to understand that environmental justice is inclusive. It is not exclusive, but in the process of making sure that we work in order to encourage justice or to encourage repair from past harms, we can't render the topic of race invisible. It has to be an explicit part of the conversation.
Yes, sir.
I think that last bit is underscoring. I want to underscore it. It's always seen it that way, is that so many programs are able to kind of gloss over the racial injustice piece when we operate. And so long as that is applied or other marginalization indicators are applied, including, as you suggested, Carlton, very rightly, the low income filters, incredibly important. We're winding down here in our last couple minutes, and I wanted to see if anyone had a final word. Christy, did you want to respond briefly, and then I'll just close it out?
I'm
one-
actually good. It was everything that was said. I was just going to talk about the importance of inclusion, and I think Carlton and Jacoby took care of that. So I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you to Jacoby.
Oh, just pass the mic to me once you get done, because I want to make sure I
All
set
right.
people for tomorrow. So just
Got
want to
it.
do that.
Will
Yeah,
do.
thank you.
Well, so let me do that briefly then. I want to first thank you all for bringing your incredible experience and expertise here. It's been a true pleasure for me to be with you for the last 70 so minutes and learn from you. I've looked up to you, so to speak, or looked towards you, and with some, now with this session, even more sense of awe, inspiration, and some envy that all of what you got out of this amazing diversity initiative program and all of the steps in between to where you've gotten to in your careers. So thank you so much. Thank you to University of Maryland. Thank you, Jacoby, for organizing such an interesting and powerful program, and Carlton for instating this particular panel. Really been a privilege. So thank you with that, Jacoby. Back to you for some housekeeping.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a great panel. Like I said, culmination for me of where I was as a young person. I'm so young, but as an undergrad, and just to be here, being be in the shoes of the folks who were mentoring me back then, right? Is pretty cool. But just for everybody, this is the end of the first day of the symposium. It's a 4-day event. So we had a great day today with Dr. Wright starting us off, and again, really going through a series of sessions. And this day has been really more national and international focus. So we had sessions on indigenous issues, sessions on international EJ issues. We had a lot of sessions on Justice 40, and a lot of sessions are, again, uplifting community, right? And like we said, with bringing stuff back from the past so we can work on the present and also restore the future, right? So I just really would like to see everyone attend again tomorrow. We Thursday, Friday, and Saturday are hybrid. So we have people who may be attending remotely, but also in person. If you're in person, we'll be at the College Park Marriott, and breakfast starts at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then to get us started with our second keynote, we will be Reverend Lennox Yearwood. Y'all know we've had him a couple times, and this will be his third time in a row, but he's going to be our opening keynote for day 2 of the 10th Siege EJ Symposium. Thank you again for participating, and looking forward to seeing everybody over the next 3 days. Y'all take care.
Thank you so much for your kind
Thanks.
attention, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, panel.
Thank you.
Be blessed.